Yo, guys, it's Swifty. I got my man Eddie back for another topic here. He wants to talk a little bit about Bears switching from a 4-3 to a 3-4 and his thoughts on that. Eddie, tell me what's on your mind. I see you shaking your head over there. Um, give me your
Man,
thoughts.
I just know that we had so many years of the 4-3, and I seen it get burnt time and time and time and time again with 7 yard slants, 8 yard slants. I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to go back to that. I feel like the way the offense has evolved, it's more of a passing game than a running game anymore. And you have your rare teams, you got your Colts, they're a run heavy team. But
49ers, yeah.
yeah, 49ers, but not many teams are like that anymore. So to me, I feel like the more defensive backs and the more people you have standing up is better than having four down. So
Yeah, one of the things that we saw a lot when with Lovey's cover two was just that the base shell cover two where they would just kind of step back and let teams eat them up underneath. One
yes.
thing I noticed from Fluce's defense when watching the Colts, I studied the Colts. I actually watched their defense a lot this week when I was studying Julian Davenport. I released that video, and one of the things I would just, instead of just watching the offense, I would just also watch the Colts on defense, and I was like, F it, I'll just watch more here. And I didn't see them do that a lot. It is a base 4-3 and it is a cover two like Lovey's, but they're not in that formation very much. They were in the nickel a lot, and in their nickel, their corners do play zone, but they play attacking zone coverage. Like,
So a lot of press.
yeah, and they attack those slants. Like, that was one of the specialties of their corner over there, Raheem Moore, is he destroyed those slants, and so did Darius Leonard. If they tried to hit you with those slants over the middle, you're gonna get popped. And that's one thing. If teams try that, they're gonna pay. And a lot of times, even if the guy caught the ball, that's a Darius Leonard special. They'd catch the ball and take a step, he'd punch it out. And Flus has already brought in Peanut to the Bears mini camp to teach
Uh,
that peanut punch.
that's
I'm
so
not too worried about that right now.
all right. Well, that's my big concern on that is that we're not going to have, and plus switching, it takes a lot of personnel change. You know what I mean? So, and we don't have that much draft capital.
Yep, and that's another reason we should trade down. See, anything else you want to touch on about the Bears?
I mean, let's. I'm excited about Justin Fields for sure.
Oh man, I love it. Yeah, that
I,
kid.
I already know. All you gotta do is say his name, and your cheeks like get red, and it's uh, yeah.
I got a video coming up on Justin Fields, and
He's
it's
got the
gonna be
prettiest deep
long.
ball I've ever seen for sure.
Yeah, it's people talked about Rex Grossman having a good deep ball, and like Fields has a better deep ball than Rex Grossman. Is bigger,
More accurate,
stronger, more accurate,
faster,
can throw
everything.
everywhere in the field, and he runs a 4-3, and he's 220 pounds. He had
That's
there was a
scary.
stat that's going to be in my video. The top two players in the league with in the fourth quarter with runs over 10 yards were Jonathan Taylor and Nick Chubb, right? Like guys you expect. Fields only started what 9 or 10 games.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was third in rushes over 10 yards in the fourth quarter.
Uh,
Third in the NFL. Like there's some
well, I mean,
stats out
his
there.
legs keep plays alive for sure.
Yep, and then he was also the third most accurate quarterback in the entire NFL behind only Justin Herbert and I don't remember who the other guy was. It wasn't Mahomes or Burrow. I think it was Josh Allen. I think it was Herbert and Allen, and then Fields, and then Mahomes and Burrow. And he's right there. He didn't throw as many deep balls as them, obviously, because he didn't play the whole
Right?
season, but he threw enough to qualify. So he ranked third in the NFL in deep ball percentage. So, I mean, God, I love Justin Fields, man. I can't
And
wait.
do you feel like his real rookie year is this year because the last year's kind of a wash because he's learning a whole new system here.
Kind of, but I feel like you're gonna see a huge improvement on him. Like the guy you saw last year, you're not gonna see. Like he was unprepared. Um, Part of it was all the way from training camp, and before that, Nagy didn't give him reps with the ones. And okay, that they were kind. He was kind of saying this is Dalton's team, and Fields isn't ready to start. But if Fields wasn't ready to start, then he shouldn't be your number 2.
Right.
Foles should have been, and he should have been your 3. If he's
You're
ready
three.
if he's ready, because your number 2 can step in a moment's notice. And
Yep.
if you're gonna make him the number 2, and not give him any reps with the ones, not let him get familiar with A-Rob or Mooney or Kmet, and have him working with guys like, what was that kid's name, Josh Adams or something? That was his favorite targets in preseason last year were Josh Adams, or Rodney Adams, I don't remember, and then
Guys that he had rapport with.
yep, Horsted and Jesse James, and it's like that's because he didn't get any reps with the ones, and A-Rob said it himself. He was like, I didn't get any reps with him in camp, like, and that's Nagy
Right.
set him up for failure from the get go, and Nagy also, you saw it from Nick Foles and them on the sideline talking to Dalton. This offense doesn't work, and
Right.
Nagy finally got exposed, and I'm just so happy he's gone. I think our team's gonna look. I think our offense is gonna look like the 49ers. I think we're gonna run the ball. We're gonna have a lot of play action, deep shots down the field, and it's gonna be beautiful.
What about Cole Kmet, bro? Have you seen that boy?
I love Cole Kmet, man.
Have you seen him lately?
Dude, he's ripped, yeah. Dude,
He's
he
so
started
jacked.
getting
He's
ripped
like
last
Thomas
year.
Jones on
He went to
bro.
tight end U with
His legs
George
are
Kittle and
hot.
Cole Kmet. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Dude's huge looking.
People hate on him, man. You're not on Twitter. You should come to Twitter someday. But there's been some people, some Bears media guys hating on him. There was a guy, he's a Bears media reporter, and he released an article the other day that basically says Cole Kmet sucks. You shouldn't throw to him in the red zone, and you shouldn't throw to him in man coverage. But the article didn't once mention like how much Cole Kmet pass blocked last year. Nagy had Cole Kmet pass blocking on 40% of the pass plays.
Right.
So
So he had
and he still had 600 yards and 6 catches as a 22-year-old tight end in Matt Nagy's offense with 3 different QBs. And people want to call him a bust, bro. They're crazy.
this year. You just hope Fields takes a step up.
Mm.
Kmet comes in there and goes crazy.
Mooney.
You get my man Sky Moore in there.
Okay.
That's in people's heads. I feel like it'll be all right.
Bro, I love it, man. I love it. No, it's I think we're in a great position. Like people are panicking right now, but we're gonna see a different team. And even if we don't win a lot of games this year, it's gonna be a team that's more fun to watch. An offense that has an identity. We haven't had an identity on offense since I've been alive, I don't think. So
We've needed it so long.
and
So
and I think it's something we're gonna do. We're gonna run the ball a lot, and I think it's not gonna just be Demo. I think Khalil Herbert's gonna get a lot of runs too, and then Fields is gonna run the ball and throw a lot of deep passes on play action too. Eddie, man, always a pleasure having you on, man. You're welcome back anytime, brother. Come back again. Anything you want to say before you go?
No, not too much, but thanks, Swifty, for having me on and talking some Bears. It's always a pleasure. And check me out at IB Bassin on YouTube. I don't post much, but it's on there. So
Awesome. Love you, man. Love you, man. Bear down, guys. Until next time, for sure. I'm talking some draft with your boy Mike B.
I did want to get your thoughts on something. I know the fan base was going. It's not nothing to do with draft, but
No, perfect.
what did you think about the outrage of the fan base of when they heard Justin Field in the office kind of had a bad training count?
People are crazy, man. That's one thing. One thing that for me, and this is Coach T would tell you this too. I kind of chopped it up with him a little bit about this when I was talking to him before our show. And the defense is always ahead of the offense when you're installing a new scheme. And that's one thing is a lot of the defensive coordinator from Luce's scheme in Indy came over with them. So Alan Williams is the guy running the D now here.
Yeah.
And they are going to teach that defense, and that defense is fast. It's a defense that flies to the ball and is athletic. That defense is going to be ahead of this offense, especially early. And on top of that, most of our bigger moves in free agency have been on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
Muhammad, Justin Jones, Crookshank, Tavon Jones, like Nicholas Morrow. All those guys are defensive players, and they're all athletic and fast. And anytime you're installing a new offense, especially when that offense is completely different than what you ran last season, there's going to be some struggles. There's a lot of change on that offensive line. There's only one guy that was starting on that offensive line, last year that's a starter this year going into the season. That's Cody Whitehair.
Yeah.
The other 4 spots all different. So people overreact, but that's what you should expect from a new scheme is the defense is always we should know that in Chicago anytime we've ever had a coaching change, but pretty much anytime here ever, our defense always looks better than the offense early on. But that's just kind of how it goes. They got to get into a rhythm.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's one thing I always said. Like anytime the defense, I'm never worried about the defense because we always have a solid to elite defense. And plus, with this offense, they built this from the ground up around Justin Fields, so it's going to take time for everything to be put in the right places. So I didn't trip about it either. I just wanted to get your thoughts because I seen a lot of Bears fans really just man, they was killing up on Twitter just talking about Justin Fields and the offense and whatnot. So I wanted to ask you
That's
what
one
you
thing.
thought.
Yeah, as a fellow content creator, and I'll make that point to you. I think a lot of the Bears media, what they do is they don't like to research or look for stories or articles. So anytime there's some kind of clickbait article like that about the quarterback, they're always going to run
Yeah,
with it because they know it's going to be popular and they know people are going to click on it, even if they're
click
just
on it.
clicking on it to hate on it. Like they're like, oh, I don't care, give me that hate.
Yeah, and some of the media, they're the ones who there. So it's like it's 50-50 whether we believe them or whether they just making some up. So that's another thing that's it's like, do I want to believe this? But they took it and just went too crazy for me. I don't think it was that, much of a problem to the way they took it and ran with it.
That's Bears fans and Bears media in general sometimes,
Yeah,
man. And that's one of the reasons why I started this channel was because a lot of the media they feed these fans the narratives and the negative takes, and that makes our fan base more negative because if that's all
yeah,
they have to get for all the negative takes, then they start to believe it. Even if they are
yeah,
someone who normally doesn't believe that, they're gonna be like, man, well, everybody's telling me that. Everybody's saying this team sucks. Everybody's mad about this. Everybody's mad about that. I'm gonna be mad too, and it's easy to be
yeah.
mad. Everybody loves to be mad. I'll get mad. I'll overreact. I don't want to research and find out if this bum's any good. They're like, I just want to be mad with everybody else.
And it's crazy. Me just starting off with the content. Like I see those things, then I watch your video. I'll watch my guy Pat the designer video, or I'll watch my guy Hayes, who they run the Windy City Sports, Chicago Bulls Central, those content. I watch them, and then they got the same level headed as me, as yourself, which bring me back to normal. Like, all right, cool. They still feel the same way. They ain't out, raging mad like the rest of the fan base. So those channels, that's why I love channels like that to keep me level headed as well. 'Cause sometimes as a fan, I may get frustrated of seeing something like that. So
Yeah, it's hard, and it's hard to sometimes, especially as a Bears fan, when we haven't won anything. We haven't won a Super Bowl in most of our lives, and we've been to one Super Bowl. We all remember Devin Hester returning that kick, and it was ultimate disappointment. So as Bear fans, it's hard, but it's also when you just had a GM that was here for 7 years, and then we go to another GM, and everybody's ready to give up on him a week
yeah,
into the or a couple weeks into the off season. It's like, come on, guys, like you got to give him time to clean up the mess that he came into.
yeah, it's a lot of mess.
It was great having you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So my boy Jordan over here, I'm going to let him introduce himself, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the NFL draft.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Swifty. My name's Jordan Silveira. You can find me on Twitter at Jordan T. Silveira.
Draft is so deep, not only at wide receiver, but at other classes, that I feel like especially a lot of people are freaking out about right guard. And this is one of those classes where I'm like, I know right guard's important, and I've had this talk with a couple people on Twitter where like you can't say one offensive line spot is less important than the other. But my biggest point on that is maybe it's not less important, but it is a lot easier to find a right guard than it is a left tackle. And I don't think we necessarily have to take a right guard with one of our first 3 picks. I think we could still get a starting caliber guard in the 5th round.
See, and now we're talking because this is like a little bit of a pet project of mine that I've really been on. And I'll give you kind of 3 roads of the ways that I've thought about this. By no means do I think that we should roll in to game 1 with Larry Borum as the starting left tackle with no competition. And I also think for Bears fans that are freaking out about the tackle positions, one, I think that it's early. Let's calm down a bit. Two, I think you really got to trust and have faith in Ryan Poles and Ian Cunningham that if they're going to get one thing right, if they know how to scout one thing, it's the offensive line. And if you think that they're good, we're not even talking about protecting Justin Fields and all that. That's just kind of the cherry on top. But the way that they understand how to build teams is having good offensive lines. You don't believe me? Let's go back to Ian Cunningham. We're not, oh, the Eagles, sure. I mean, we can talk about the Eagles' offensive line dating back to Todd Harriman's, Trey Thomas, Jason Peters. We can go down the list, but I'm not even talking about that. A lot of people don't realize that Ian Cunningham started in Baltimore, another place that's had phenomenal offensive line play year in and year out. So if there's a thing that I trust him to be able to get into Ryan Poles' ear about is building up the trenches, as well as Ryan Poles. I mean, if you look no further than the job that they did in Kansas City last year, building an entire new offensive line for Pat Mahomes after they got waxed by the Buccaneers in the Super Bowl. And it's just a situation where when you look at the greater stories of the league, traditionally the teams that are finding great success are the ones that have great offensive lines, great trench play. I think back to, and we'll talk a little bit about defensive line here, but I think back to like the Giants when they beat Brady. They had Kiwanuka, Strahan, trying to remember the D tackle that was there, but I mean they had they had Umenyiora,
it was Tuck, yeah.
Tuck, Kiwanuka, Umenyiora, Strahan, and then another defensive tackle. But regardless, that's one. Then you think about the Derek Carr MVP year in Oakland. That time they had Gabe Jackson and they had Rodney Hudson and they had Donald Penn. I mean, you talk about these good offensive lines. What about back when Dak and Zeke were rookies? Why were they so successful? It's because they had a great offensive line. What about the Colts? Well, yeah, all of a sudden when you draft Quentin Nelson and you have Braden Smith, I mean, these are all franchises that find success because they have offensive lines. So I say all that to say I don't tend to think that Ryan Poles and Ian Cunningham are going to neglect that. And I think if you were to put Borum out there with no competition in week one, that would be neglectful. So I'll present you my kind of quick 3 roads on how I'd fix that. Perfect, I've been a proponent of Dwayne Brown for as long as I can remember. Dwayne Brown to me represents what you got with Jason Peters, but younger and better. So it's just kind of getting that same output. Now, in this case, you don't even have to play Jason Peters or in this case, Dwayne Brown for the whole season. And I understand Dwayne Brown may be a guy that says, I'm not coming to be a swing tackle and a mentor. Well, then I'm looking at Dwayne Brown. I'm saying, no, that's fine. Go ahead and compete with Larry Borum. If you beat out Larry Borum, you can be our starting left tackle. That's not a problem. And then Borum switches back to the swing tackle, and you have a veteran and a mentor on that offensive line that is proven as all get out to protect Justin Fields' blind side.
Oh, yeah.
That's your left tackle solution. Now we're talking about the giant hole at right guard. The thing with right guard is I think that Lucas Patrick, we all know he's been brought in to play center, but he has guard versatility. I think that you find your center in the draft if it makes sense. If Tyler Linderbaum is there at 39, that is a player that I would send the card in, no hesitation. I'm not even answering the phone for trade calls. I can wax poetically for hours on Tyler Linderbaum, but that's a guy that I would slide in at center immediately and tell Lucas Patrick, no problem, you're our right guard, and now you've solved 2 issues with 1. Now, if for some reason that doesn't fall, maybe you're trying to get a Cole Strange or a Cam Jurgens and those guys don't hit, the right guard market is rich, and this goes to what you're saying, which is the idea of picking it up in the 5th round. Now, I even have some guys I like before that if you wanted to take, like, I'll give you a little bit of a man crush, Luke Gadecki, Central Michigan, Chippewa, right tackle, played opposite of Bernard Ryman. He's a guy that if you took him at 71, I wouldn't hesitate. And he may be there later in the 5th, but with those 5th round guards, you're talking about guys like Lecitus Smith, Josh Azudu. You're talking about guys like Cade Mays, 5-star recruit, played at Georgia, transferred over to Tennessee. Cade Mays is the guy that I really kind of comp to Trey Smith from last year. Now, of course, he doesn't have the medical history that forced Trey Smith to fall. But in certain ways, Cade Mays offers you everything that Trey Smith did at the later pick without the medical concerns. And so the offensive line is, to me, one of the deepest positions in the draft and not one that I find myself worrying about.
Oh, I love it, man. And Cade Mays is a guy that's not talked about a lot. He's overlooked because he's not one of those guys rising up the draft boards like Cole Strange. So he's kind of just getting forgot about and dropped down. And he's a guy that early on I thought was actually going to rise up the draft board, and it never really happened. But more on your point of great teams, they do build through the offensive line, and they don't just do it with 1 or 2 picks. They do it continually, and they have great backups. And that way when a guy gets hurt, they have the backup step in and they don't miss a beat. And we've watched Green Bay do that for years. They churn out offensive linemen like you can't even think. And we're just like, oh, great, their left tackle's out. Oh, we should be able to sack him now. And they have some guy come in and you're like, how's this guy blocking our pass rushers? Who is this guy? Like, and we've never have that because when our backup comes in, it's like, oh, Rashad Coward. This guy shouldn't be in the NFL. And
Well, it's funny you say that because there's a few guys in the draft this year that, I mean, I guess maybe they could end up in Chicago now that we got Luke Getsy, but I look at these particular guys like a Logan Bruss or Stuber out of Michigan and think to myself, those guys have Green Bay Packers written all over them. They're going to be those 5th, 6th round picks that are going to end up there with Adam Stenavich as the new offensive coordinator there. He used to be the former offensive line coach for Green Bay, coaching up a Logan Bruss, coaching up a Stuber so that they can watch guys like Bakhtiari walk, or I guess Billy Turner's already walked, but maybe an Elgin Jenkins, for example, in a few years when they've developed these guys. And, you know, a guy like Logan Bruss becomes the new Lucas Patrick in 3 or 4 years. So it's they're an O-line factory as well. I mean, everybody knows that if you're a Bears fan.
oh, 100%. They always churn out the offensive line. Technique. I've seen a lot of Twitter talking about Travis Jones. I think he's a little too big and more of a nose. But Lil and Winfrey both, in my opinion, could also be pretty good 3 techniques.
See, so here's the funny part. My next guy, without a doubt, is Travis Jones. And I'll answer your question. I know you said, like, let's talk about
Oh,
Lil.
yeah, I want to hear it, yeah.
We'll go with that. I will answer it, but I mean, let me kind of wax poetically about Travis Jones for just a millisecond here. Travis Jones, I totally get it, is traditionally a one tech, is that nose disruptor, space eater. I get it. But watching his tape, seeing how explosive he is, and then, as I said earlier, the film is really what should be the dictator of how you come to your evaluation of a player. And then those underwear Olympics and measurables and testing metrics really should be the thing that kind of finalize or lock in or force you to go back and watch the tape and reevaluate. And when I watched the tape, I was like, wow, this guy's explosive. And then I watched it work out and saw the measurables and the metrics, and I was like, well, I don't need to go back. This confirms what I saw.
Oh, wow.
And so I know that doesn't answer your question of, well, how does he fit as a 3 tech?
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, I look at his body and see a guy that's explosive and think that you can tell him to shed some pounds and lose the weight and get down to that 3 tech level. Now you have a guy like Logan Hall that I'm looking at him and saying, just get to like DeForest Buckner level, which is like 295. But that's not, there's no traditional, like that's the 3 tech numbers. You need to be under 300. You can be 310 and be a 3 tech. So I think you can tell Travis Jones to shed some pounds and have him putting on his track shoes, as Coach Flus would say, running around, doing the hits philosophy, and then finding himself getting into that explosive disruptor at 3 tech shape.
What do you think about, do you think there's a possibility that he could also move around the line a little bit? Like you could have plays where he's at the nose, Justin Jones is at the 3 technique. And then another on your point there as well, there's not an exact weight, but yeah, he could be a little bit bigger and be a 3 technique if he can fill the role for Flus.
Absolutely. And I don't think that there's, I mean, something that I don't think a lot of fans talk about that I really think is important is the big difference between the last defense under Vic Fangio and this one is that you had a guy like Eddie Goldman, and in that scheme, I mean, don't get me wrong, their job is to get upfield and produce some pass rush, and Eddie Goldman was good at that. But really the idea is that those 5 techs, that Roy Robertson Harris, down to your nose tackles at Eddie Goldman, are supposed to hold blocks so that the linebackers behind can scan and fill and spill. So spill and fill rather. So you're basically chasing down ball carriers sideline to sideline. And the reality is, and Brian Urlacher's talked about this, it's anybody that knows the new scheme, that's really just a refresh of Monty Kiffin down to Tony Dungy, down to Lovie Smith, is that the defensive line, you're supposed to win in pressure with 4. So they play the they play the run to the pass. What that ends up doing is that you don't have a nose tackle eating up space. So you have blockers that are pushing upfield to Roquan Smith. And if there's a weak part of Roquan Smith's game, it's stacking and shedding blocks. And so when you talk about a Travis Jones, I know everybody's like, but he's just too big. And I'm thinking, I don't give a shit. And I'm sorry, I don't know if we can curse here, but the reality is that you're sitting here and you're looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, yes, I want Travis Jones to penetrate and push up. But if he's getting 2 guys on him because of his size, that frees up Roquan a little more in an area that he needs help with. even more than a Logan Hall. Like I still have Logan Hall above for the archetype, but if you told me, well, what's a concern? Well, it's that he's kind of got the Ogunjobi feel. He pushes up field and disrupts, which is excellent. But he tends to let the run kind of blow past him as he gets washed down. And then that ends up leaving guards in Roquan's chest. And Roquan, I mean, go watch the college tape at Georgia. He would just kind of disappear off the play because he just couldn't stack and shed on big guards. And he's not a big guy. So I think a Travis Jones opens that up for you to basically eat space while still being athletic enough to penetrate and move along the line.
That's a great take, man. That's a great take. Yeah, I love it.
So that's kind of my take for why I think Travis Jones is my second 3-tech. Now, I mean, something we were kind of talking about earlier is guys that I'm not high on.
Okay.
So I said, everybody's kind of my kid. The two players, and I have a few more, and I mean, I'll spill a little bit of those for you. Like, I'm not a big Brandon Smith, Penn State fan. Not a big fan of a few other players, Charlie Kohler, for example. Two, though, that are at like the top of my list is Perrion Winfrey and Marvin Leal.
Both on the not like list?
Yeah, they're on my shit list. So it's not that I wouldn't draft them. I think that they're talented. I would probably even take Leal over Winfrey. But if you told me that it was those guys or a wide receiver or a corner or a safety or alignment, I would tell you go with one of those other positions before you took one of these guys. So this is the real differentiator. If you told me that Travis Jones or Logan Hall was your pick at 39 or 48, or even 71, or I had the option for Leal or Winfrey, I'm totally okay spending one of those picks on Jones or Hall. But if Winfrey or Leal were there, I would tell you to go ahead and pass and find a Thomas Booker or a John Ridgeway or a Haskell Garrett later on. And so and one thing you'll find out about me, Swifty, as we kind of get to know each other here, is that I don't tend to have just opinions or takes. If you're hearing me have a stance, I'm always going to substantiate it. That's kind of my MO. So
I love that, man. I'm the same way. Yeah, I mean, it's weird sometimes you get those people who they'll have a take and they won't budge off it. But when you try to ask them why or dig any deeper into it, they don't have anything. They'll just, and if they don't agree with you on Twitter, a lot of times they'll just insult you, and then it's like, okay, well, this isn't gonna work out.
Yeah. Well, and that's where it's one thing for me to tell you I don't like Leal Winfrey. Now I get to go into why, so that if anybody that hears this, he's crazy. I mean, you don't.
Well, I want to hear it too. I mean, I haven't studied the defensive tackles as much as I should have because I got too focused on. I went so deep into offensive line and wide receivers that I've watched those guys a little bit. I always do because I'm always so big on the draft, but I haven't dug deep on either of those guys. So I'm sitting here with my eyes big. I want to hear what you have to say about these guys too.
Sure. So let's start with Winfrey because I mean, I guess I'll give you one of my knocks, and this is my own personal thing. It may be petty. So we talk on a personal level, and if you wanted me to go deep into how I scout players, I can talk about that another time. But part of my thing is, as I've said a few times already, is I let the film dictate how I'm evaluating. That to me really is the meat of my evaluation. And so whenever I hear the topic of Perrion Winfrey brought up, all I continue to hear is, well, he had a great week at the Senior Bowl. And I'm like, no, I mean, that's important. Good. But like, that's not everything. And yeah, I saw him kick ass at the Senior Bowl. I'm not taking an ounce away from him. But the reality is when I watch him play, and I would urge anybody watching this, even you, Swifty, to go back and actually watch Oklahoma film. He's a guy that is explosive, is a disruptor. However, he tends to play with his pads extremely high. And he's got these huge orangutan arms, which is wonderful. He's able to lock guys out and kind of control them and stack and shed blocks. I get it. But when you're standing up higher, you're letting guys and inviting them into your chest. Okay. And so even though you have these long orangutan arms, as soon as an offensive lineman, if they have good grip strength and they're worth any of their weight in gold, if they're a quality guy, once they have your chest plates, you're done. You're done. I mean, I'm a big fan of like Luke Gadecki, and I've talked about him, but he's a guy that has such grip strength that once he's into your chest, it's rep. The rep is over. I promise you're not getting out. So I have an issue with Winfrey that when as soon as the snap starts, he tends to just, I don't want to say stand straight up, but he gets his pad level so high that his chest is out there inviting blockers in. And it's one thing if you're going to let blockers into your chest, but then I need you to have a killer set of moves or hand usage to fight the block.
Yep.
And when I see Winfrey get those guys into his chest, he doesn't, and this is really the second critique of his game, I don't see a plan for the rush. So he'll have an idea of, okay, so I'm going to get up, I'm going to try a cross chop, or I'm going to sit there and try to long arm him. And then as soon as the long arm or the cross chop doesn't work and they're into his chest, he gets stuck on a block. He doesn't know how to fight it. And that's a real issue with a 3-tech that, hey, my job is to not only hold up gaps and sit there and fight over the backside of a play to get upfield. So sure, you can point me to Senior Bowl film. You can tell me where he's explosive. But the reality is I see much more boom or bust. And that was an issue I had with Ogunjobi, which is, don't get me wrong, when they're on, they're lightning in a bottle. But oftentimes they have real technical issues that prevent them from being down in and down out dominators, the way that a Tommy Harris was, or a Warren Sapp, or DeForest Buckner, or any of the 3-techs. I mean, I go back deep to, like, even talking about a little bit of Chris Hovan and the Williams brothers in Minnesota, and Chris Jenkins. And I mean, you talk about these guys that really penetrate up the middle. I don't see that with Winfrey consistently.
And that's one thing where sometimes with the Senior Bowl, it can get a little overrated. For me, the Senior Bowl is more of a thing to evaluate guys who didn't play against elite competition.
Correct.
And then you can see kind of how they stack up. Whereas a guy like Perrion Winfrey played at Oklahoma. So his tape isn't going to lie. Like,
Correct.
if he's not dominating against his competition, he's probably not going to dominate against bigger competition. But when a lower school guy, someone who played at a school not in the SEC, not in the Big Ten, they're playing in the Division II, Division IIIs, those guys, when you get to the Senior Bowl, you have the chance to evaluate, okay, how do they play when they're with guys more their skill level? And that's when, if they dominate, you're like, okay, this guy's kind of showing me he can play on that level. But if he did that at the Senior Bowl, but he didn't do it on tape at Oklahoma, to me that tells me, okay, is he loafing? What was going on there? Was he taking plays off? Did he work on his game a lot? Sometimes you can look into it a little bit more. I don't know exactly what happened with him. But if you dominate the Senior Bowl, but you didn't do that consistently on tape, that's not a huge deal for me.
Yeah, and I think you're so spot on there when you talk about that, because like a guy that comes to mind to me is Troy Anderson. I'm a big fan of, linebacker out of Montana State. That's a key scenario, perfect of what you're talking about, when you have a prospect that hasn't played big school ball. And now one thing is, I want to make sure that prospect, if I'm considering drafting them, they need to dominate consistently on that low-level school tape. And then the next step is, okay, let's put you in an all-star bowl where you're playing against top 10, Power 5 programs, SEC, Big Ten. How are you playing against those? And that's kind of the extra step. But if you're, like you said, a Perrion Winfrey, a Sam Howell, John Mechie, any of those guys that are there, I can't sign off on that. So, and one of the things you mentioned with Winfrey is that he tends to loaf. I've seen a little bit. I certainly have seen some plays where you can see a change of speed. And that's one of my favorite things when you hear Flus talk, is he doesn't get into exactly how they define loafs, but one of the things he's consistently talked about is a change of speed. And you can see that when he's backside on a play, he's not hunting it down, running at 100 miles an hour. But to Perrion Winfrey's credit, on other reps, I've literally watched him force a fumble by running back down from behind and getting there and punching a ball out. So there is some redeeming factors. And this is the beautiful thing is, again, if you're hearing me critical about a prospect, these guys are all real people. They all are working hard. It's not that I hate the guy. It's not that I don't want him to get drafted. And if you hear me talking negative, I try to make sure that I'm also, if I'm going to be fair and give some criticism, you're going to hear me give some positives. So I think that he can be coached up with some of his hand moves, playing lower, hustling to the ball. And if there's one thing that really should sell you on that, is that as much as I don't love hearing that you want to buy him because he had a good Senior Bowl, what that does tell me is that he understands when he needs to turn it on, and he showed up at the most important time, so that he had a killer Senior Bowl week, had a great time performance in the game, and knew that after that, I'm just smooth sailing. I'm rising up the board.
Yep.
So he understands.
And sometimes also, I mean, there are NFL coaches. You're working with an NFL coaching staff. Sometimes you can get with a D-line coach and you're in practice and they can see instantly like, oh, this is what you're not doing. Your pad level's too high. You need to get down and you need to get out of that. And it could take something like that and him to be like, oh, and then all of a sudden he starts dominating, and that could be something. Sometimes there are times where they do have something click and they get better, but it's always something you have to look into deeper. You can't just be like, oh, this guy dominated the Senior Bowl, he's going to be awesome. But one of the guys who did that impressed me was Cole Strange. He was a guy coming from a small
Yes.
school, played really well at the Senior Bowl, and now he's shooting up the draft boards. And it's like, okay, you didn't have to play that well at the Senior Bowl, because I would have liked to get you in the 3rd to 5th round, but it's okay.
See, Cole Strange is a funny one because he is one of the only prospects that actually shut down Winfrey in Senior Bowl week. I mean, all reports from Senior Bowl week is that nobody wanted to face Perry and Winfrey. He was kicking everybody's ass. And one of the only offensive linemen to really, truly stonewall him was Cole Strange. So, I mean, big reps to him, big props. And I mean, one little thing I'd like to add to Winfrey's game too is that, I mean, again, because I think watching the film is important. The scheme didn't exactly help Winfrey out. Oklahoma stems a lot of their pressures. So what that means is they're shifting the entire line right before the play. So, and you're like, well, what does that matter? If it's Winfrey, he needs to just be able to get up the field. But when you're playing defensive line, you need to be able to, be able to hold your gap, play gap responsibility, but also understand what's happening. So if you started at like 3 tech and you're like, okay, I'm going to be able to penetrate here. I'm not worried about a down block. And then a second and a half before the play snaps, I have to move over. And now I'm trying to read, am I going to face a down block here from the guard coming down? Are they pin and pulling me? What do I do? How do I keep responsibility of my gap? That doesn't play to a guy's strength. So again, not my type of, not a prospect that I'd want to draft early, but I think he's got some middling traits, some developmental routes that he can be improved on. And I mean, the last one, and I'll try to be quicker. I know I've been rambling.
Oh,
but
you're good. You're good.
With DeMarvin Leal, it's much of the same thing, and not so much with the pad level and with the rush, the planned rush hand usage. My big issue with him is just it's truly boom or bust at the highest level.
Okay.
He has like perfect 3 tech body. Like
That's kind of what I picked
up. It up any better. Like when you look at the stats, his measurements, you're like, oh, that's our 3 tech. And he was a really highly touted prospect. I mean, we're talking months ago at this point, but he was a guy that was seen as a top 10
Top
pick.
10, yep. All last year, he was in most big boards top 10, and it's like...
Yeah. And the thing with him is that he disappears a lot on tape. And you want to talk about potential loafing. He's a guy that it's not even like potential. It is. He does not run plays down from the backside. He tends to look undisciplined in his gap responsibility. And sure, he blows up a play every once in a while, and you're like, wow, that's special. But there's a real question of, and then on top of that, something we talked about is I don't like to put a lot of value in testing and metrics. I'm consistent. I don't. But when the tape is the meat of my evaluation, I'm going, it's a little spotty. He's a little sporadic in how much he's showing up and when he disappears. And then we look at the testing, and it's low bench, not incredibly fast. I think he ran like a 5 flat 40. It begs the question of like, so they're not matching up. And, sometimes you hear it like, well, the Senior Bowl of Perry and Winfrey was great, and I'm looking at it, but the tape didn't match up. Okay, well, what's going on there? Well, now I'm looking at Leal, and I'm going, I don't love the tape this last year, and I saw a lot of inconsistency. And now I look at the testing, and it's the same thing. I just can't get on board with that. I wouldn't take him 71. I guess I guess, but it really comes to the situation where, and I mean, we can talk about this if you want, but Thomas Booker to me is a much more cerebral player, and didn't show up a lot at Stanford because he was playing the 4-eye, which is just a nasty, gritty position that's kind of thankless. You're taking on blocks the whole time, holding down, holding blockers up so that your linebackers can fly to the ball at Stanford. And so I look at a guy like him and think, no, maybe he's not as explosive, which, by the way, I mean, he tested better than Leal, and he's an athletic freak in himself. But, a guy like him in the round 5 versus Leal at, 71, and I don't have the concerns. And that's the thing, too, is when you're talking about draft capital, it's really the idea of economics. You're trying to always come out on the winning side of the deal.
Yep.
If I spend a 71, and this is free agency too, for that matter, but if I spend $20 million a year or I spend a 3rd round pick, that comes with a certain level of expectations and investment. And now all of a sudden, it's a lot harder to feel okay with the move. When you pay Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams $25 million a year, you better expect him to catch every single ball. And when it's 4th and 10, you can throw up a 50-50 ball and he comes down with it. And that is the only way that you feel comfortable and happy paying that guy $20 million every year. That's the same thing with a draft pick. If I select DeMarvin Leal at 48, and let's just say Alec Pierce was there at 48, and you take Leal and he's like a 6-sack-a-year guy, and he's just kind of floating around on the roster. And I love Cole Kmet, but like, let's give it the Cole Kmet treatment. And I have so much respect for Cole Kmet. I think he's been dealt a really shitty hand of cards with Matt Nagy's system. Same with David Montgomery. But let's talk about like a DeMarvin Leal, where you look at him and you say, okay, he's kind of got the Cole Kmet treatment. He's just kind of floating, just getting by, producing okay stats. And then you've got a guy like Alec Pierce, who's all of a sudden becoming the next Jordy Nelson or a true perimeter DK Metcalf level player. There's going to be a real level of remorse in the hindsight going, we picked Leal over Pierce, when instead take somebody that you trust the film on, you trust the player, the character, the medicals, and then go, okay, I'm going to take Pierce. And now I can take Thomas Booker, John Ridgeway, Haskell Garrett, Marquand McCall, Jaden Peavy is a guy that doesn't get talked about, and I love me some Jaden Peavy. So, you talk about guys like that in the 5th round, and you find yourself going, he's on a developmental track. We spent a 5th-round pick. There's not a lot of expectations. If he turns out to be something wonderful, and then you get the Roy Robertson-Harris effect, where that was like a 5th-round pick. Travis Gibson, that's a 5th-rounder where you look at it, or maybe it's a 4th, but you look at it and you say, okay, here's an opportunity where the expectation isn't through the roof to produce. And right now where the Bears find themselves is they have a lot of holes. And everybody, and I think it's a fair expectation that the Bears and Ryan Poles better be able to walk out of that draft on I guess, Sunday at the end of it all and say, we have for sure 3 contributors, 3 starters right now. Anything more is cherry on top. But if you're going to sit here and tell me, and yes, they could trade back and all these things, but the reality is I don't want you trading back to tell me you got 2 starters and then we got 4 role players. If you're trading back, the expectation is you started with 39, 48, and 71. Those are top 100 picks. You can find contributors, real solid players that will start this year and contribute and produce. At the start of the draft, before any trade, you have 3. If you trade back, you still better have 3.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I think you can potentially, like you said, top 100 picks. I think you can get another starter. So you could trade back any one of those first 2 picks, even a couple spots, and potentially pick up another top 100 pick. Like you go from 39 to 45, should be able to get a 3rd or 4th rounder there that's right around the top 100 pick. And to me, that's what I'm on for. Obviously, with that first pick, if someone is there, like if Linderbaum falls or if Logan Hall is there or Zion Johnson, there's somebody it's like at 39, you're like, I have to take that guy, do it. If not, you move back a little bit and you have 3 top 71 picks plus another pick or 2 you could potentially add on later depending on what you do. And you're still going to get those 3 starters and potentially can get a couple starters in the 4th to 5th round as well.
Yeah, and I mean that speaks a little bit as a draft philosophy, and I'm right there with you, Swifty, which is the idea that if I'm trading back, I know there's a lot of people that say like, well, just trade back to like 62, and all of a sudden you'll have a ton of picks because you're moving back 20 spots. I can't get on board with that, and the reason is, I mean, the philosophy really should be that if I'm at 39, honestly, if you're at 71, 148, it doesn't matter. If I'm trading back, it's because I've looked at the board and determined that I have a player that I would take now, but I also like X many other players. And if I'm moving back 5 spots, I better have 6 players I like right now at the pick. And if I'm moving back 21 spots, well, there better be 23 players that are as good as what you're about to give up right now.
That's a great point. Yeah. See, that one's great.
That's the thing. Like, and this is a situation where, I mean, on a couple levels, I think that the areas I've really pegged to trade that I would love, and again, it takes 2 to tango. Everybody knows the draft this year is full of depth, so nobody wants to really trade up when they can just sit where they are. But the areas I've really thought about, and it would break my heart because I'm a big Logan Hall fan, but I think you could try to convince Baltimore to come up and jump over Cleveland for Logan Hall
Okay.
if he's there, because that's a scenario where they both could use a player like that, and I could see Baltimore grabbing a guy like him, but they'd have to get above Cleveland because they're one spot behind. Another one that I'm like begging and praying, and it's definitely wishful thinking, is I'd love to be able to kind of fleece the Falcons. I have nothing against Terry Fontenot, but Ryan Pace has come in there and shown some level of control where they're just signing old Bears players. And the reason why they make so much sense is they're at 43. You move back 4 spots. So even if you're going to lose Logan Hall or McCreary or whoever, I'd like to think that 4 players later, there's still equal value there that you can pick out. And the point of that is to say, Terry Fontenot, Ryan Pace, why don't you come up? You drafted a receiver at 8 or whatever it was, or Travon Walker. You know you need a quarterback. You signed Marcus Mariota for 2 years. It's fine, but don't you want to develop somebody? And even if you don't, what happens if Marcus gets hurt? Are you really going to trot out Josh Rosen or Felipe Franks? So I'd like you to come up to 39. We'll go back to 43. You're jumping Seattle, who has 40 and 41, for a Matt Corral, for a Sam Howell, for Carson Strong, one of those guys. And all of a sudden you're saying, and it doesn't have to be a ton of capital. Now, Atlanta's flush with picks. They got the extra 3rd round pick with the Colts for trading Matt Ryan. They had the extra 2nd round pick from trading Julio Jones last year. So there's ammo there to say, no harm, no foul. We'll move back 4 spots. You get your quarterback. You jump the Seattle Seahawks, who also need a quarterback. You get your guy. And all we need is that extra 3rd round pick.
Yeah, in this draft, I feel like it's so deep. Like, anytime you do mock drafts or people see it, I mean, obviously they look fake, but that's one of the things I feel like when we get to the real draft, there are going to be guys like that who fall. Because there are guys who none of us have ever heard of, or people are talking about very rarely, that are going to be surprised and be day 2 picks. Even a couple potential late 1st rounders are going to be guys that no one expected to go there. And there's going to be guys falling. And I feel like all the way to 71, your point, I feel like we can get guys down there. I obviously wouldn't want to trade both picks down to 70. I mean, if we traded 38 and 49 and went down to 70, or 39 and 48, and went down to the 70s, I feel like we should have 4 4th round picks with that as well. So it wouldn't be a horrible situation, but I do want to take someone we love at one of those first 2 picks, and then one of them I wouldn't mind moving back. Like you said, that was a perfect scenario there. There's definitely going to be a quarterback or 2 left right there, and teams are going to be targeting that early 2nd round, and Atlanta could say, hey, I'll move up here. Going down 5 picks and picking up a 3rd rounder would be a dream situation for me, because no matter what players we lose in those 3 to 4 picks, maybe it will be a Logan Hall or somebody, but there's going to be someone else on the board, a guard or a wide receiver, cornerback. Someone's going to be there, and they're going to be like, we'll be fine. Like, we just got an extra 3rd round pick. We'll be okay.
Well, see, and this is the thing is, I mean, obviously we're not Ryan Poles and we don't know what's going on in his brain, but if I'm at 39, there's really only like 2 or 3 players that I'm not moving off of for. And I guess I'll go with some of the unrealistic ones, then I'll give you some more realistic ones. So the unrealistic ones is, yes, if Chris Olave's there, I don't think you move back. You take him. I love Olave. I want to be very clear about that. He's my Z1 on the board, my wide receiver 2 overall, just behind Drake London. It's a preference thing. Pick your flavor. I like ball winners. But I understand the chemistry there, and you hear about how Justin Fields just glowingly talks about Olave. If Olave is there at 39, I think you just take it. You don't move back. That's a little bit unrealistic. I just don't see how he makes it there. He's incredibly refined. Garrett Wilson's not going to be there. So the only other guy that really could potentially fall there is Tyler Linderbaum. And again, I don't really think that's going to happen. I mean, because even everybody thinks like the Bengals would take him. But even then, like the one that really hurts is Jaguars are sitting there at 33. And they just had their starting center, Brandon Linder, retire. It makes all the sense in the world. Just go ahead and pick up Linderbaum. Now, the only way I guess that may not happen is if they pick like Ike Mekwonu or Evan Neal at the top at 1, and they get that protector so that when Cam Robinson leaves next year post-franchise tag, maybe they don't want to sit there and go, we're going to take 2 offensive linemen in a row. But I honestly wouldn't see the problem with it. They've spent so much money on wide receivers. They don't need to draft a wide receiver.
Okay, so let me give you a couple other guys who I think could potentially fall there, and you tell me if these guys would fit
Sure.
that bill for you as well. For me, I would say Treylon Burks is that wide receiver. I don't see him falling,
I don't
but
either.
a lot of people are saying it, and I mean, it happened with DK Metcalf and Debo Samuel, and this wide receiver class is deep, and he doesn't fit every system. If he's there, I say you take him. And then the other two guys I also think are kind of unrealistic, but Zion Johnson and Kenyon Green at guard. Like I said, you can get a guard real late, but if those guys are there at 39, I would say you almost just snatch them up.
See, it's so funny you say that. Like, I'm going to come across as a hater, and
That's
I
okay.
promise I like all these. It's hard for me to justify a guard at 39. As good as Zion Johnson or Kenyon Green are. Well, one thing is, I don't think that those guys make it. And the reason I say that is, well, one, the Patriots literally have a meteor-sized hole from shipping Shaq Mason to the Buccaneers for a guard. So I just, and yeah, I guess they could find a later guy, but if a Zion Johnson or a Kenyon Green is there, it's hard for me to imagine that they don't say, we just got Mac Jones, we got to protect him. We just shipped off Shaq Mason, our best offensive lineman. Let's go ahead and plug Zion Johnson there, and we're fine. And then the other one that's funny is the Buccaneers. I know that I just said they got Shaq Mason, and that replaces Ali Marpet, but they lost Alex Kappa to the Bengals. So they have a guard spot open as well. And I think that they're a spot where I look at it like a Kenyon Green would make sense and go, okay, now we're just going to bulk it back up for Tom Brady and Kyle Trask or whoever comes after Tom Brady. And now you have Donovan Smith, Kenyon Green, Ryan Jensen, and then Shaq Mason and your right tackle Tristan Wirfs. So, I mean,
That's a good line. That's a good.
Yeah.
But
So I don't see those guys making it. But the reason I would say I'm not hot on those is I just think guard can be had later. And I know you're like, but wait, you'd take Linderbaum over? Well, I have a special crush on Linderbaum. I actually think he's a very special talent, but this may be controversial to some. To me, the center position is, I guess I'll concede to natural tradition. Sure, I can concede the tackle position is more important than center. I'll give you this concession, though. I will say that one tackle position is more important than the center. And that is whatever tackle is the blindside protector for your quarterback. Now, I know you're like, well, so Buden, both tackles? Sure, I like both tackles. But if you told me to build a line from scratch, the first guy I'm taking is my blindside protector for my quarterback. The second guy I'm taking without a doubt is a center. So if you told me that the guards were there, I'm not enticed to take them because I can go get a Luke Gadecki or Cade Mays or any of these other guys. And I know you could say, well, you can go get Cole Strange or Luke Fortner or Cam Jurgens, but I think that Linderbaum presents the most important position outside of tackle. And I also think he's a generational special talent. So that's a scenario there. And then you mentioned Treylon Burks. This is the one I think I come across as a hater on. I don't have any necessarily negative thing about Treylon Burks. He is incredible on film. I think he has some real special plays. I didn't see enough refinement. And I know that's hard because you're like, well, just coach him up. You can get refinement. I just don't see it. I think that he played a lot out of the slot, which isn't the end of the world, but I don't look at him like Alan Lazard. I don't think that he's this big power slot that's kind of a refined route runner. And so then you talk about, okay, well, can he play perimeter? Because that's kind of what Justin needs, if we're being frank. He's a guy that wants to take perimeter shots down the sideline, 65-yard bombs, drop it in on a moonshot over the DB shoulders into the breadbasket of a receiver. And we didn't see a lot of Treylon Burks doing that at Arkansas. And I know he had a crappy quarterback and everything like that. And I certainly have seen the highlights and watched film where he's mossing dudes on the perimeter. I get it. But the tape's just a little inconsistent. And then he came in and testing, and I think he plays faster than what his testing numbers dictated, but still kind of raised a little bit of an eyebrow, like what's going on here. And I just don't know how much of a character fit he is. There's concerns about his weight. And, you're talking about a scheme and a team now that believes body fat percentages are the most important and getting on your horse and running around and following through and finishing every play. And, it becomes a question, kind of what you were saying, which is at 39, do I take Treylon Burks or do I move back and get George Pickens or Alec Pierce or Khalil Shakir? And it's like, I'm not telling you those guys are Treylon Burks, but I don't think the drop off is that significant.
No, I get that. That's a great point. I just with Burks specifically, I could see him as just a different role for the Bears, and
Sure.
I want to kind of say the Debo Samuel, but not only that, but when you have Mooney and Pringle, they can take the top off defenses, and then
Mhm.
you have a guy like Burks where you can just hike the ball, throw him a quick screen, and he is so good at making that first guy miss or breaking through that first tackle that he's going to get you those easy yards, and that's something that Jamar Chase did a lot for Joe Burrow that people don't talk
You're right.
about. Is everyone wants to they see his deep passes, and yeah, you get those deep catches, but one of the things that made that offense move was when they needed a couple yards. They even used Jamar Chase on jet sweeps multiple times throughout the year. I think it was only like 3 to 5 times, but when they needed a 3rd and 1, Jamar Chase would slide into the backfield and they'd throw that little jet sweep. Something I really thought they should have done in the playoffs. But when I imagine Burks in that role in this offense, I think he could be special. Like to your point though, I do love Pickens and Pierce and think they're a little different dynamic. I think they're more boundary receivers who can also stretch the field. They're
Yeah.
not really gonna be the guys you throw the screen to that break tackles. They could probably do it, but Pierce did not show much breaking the tackle ability to me. He's more of a jump ball possession receiver.
Sure, sure. And I think that that's a fair criticism. I hear you completely. And this is not a direct shot at you, Swifty. It's just
Oh yeah.
it's probably the narrative that I can't stand. That and you're just the latest to say it, but I hear it. It feels like every day, numerous times. Is this guy could be Debo Samuel, and I'm like, I'm so sick of that shit because it's like, there's Debo Samuels don't just walk the planet. They just don't. Like Elijah Moore's not Debo Samuel, and Amari Cooper and CD Lamb. They're just if Debo Samuel was easy to encounter, he'd be on every team. And they've tried it with other guys. Greg Little out of North Carolina back when he was drafted to the Browns was a similar type of body. It's been tried before to have this wide receiver that's dynamic with the ball in his hands. And I mean, you even saw guys like Cooper Kupp being played in the backfield like Debo was on little option routes and flag routes and things like that. So it's not to say that I don't see some of what you're talking about in Traylon Burks. It's just the scenario where, and you may not even be alluding to this, but people say he could be Debo. And they're talking about like you put Debo as the wide back and you put him in the backfield and you throw him a toss and watch him make magic. And it's like, that's a very particular skill set that not a lot of players have. And there's one thing I will not take away from Traylon Burks is that when he has the ball in his hands, he's electric. He
Yep.
does tend to shake a few tackles and he has great, I mean, something that people talk about is that he ran a slow 40. I watched that guy outrun Alabama. I've never seen him get
Entire
caught.
secondary, yeah.
Yeah, like he's never gotten caught from behind. So this is what I said when I was saying, hey, I see him playing faster than the metrics. I don't think that the speed's a concern. And when you add that up with he's shaking tackles, and then if he can break one loose and then nobody catches him, you're getting touchdowns. I see the allure.
I said Debo, it's more to me it's like that new age wide receiver. And
Yes.
Debo's used in a special role. Debo runs the ball way more than any other guy in the NFL. No one else really does that. And the guy who I did see have the ability that I mentioned to is Jamar Chase. And he's a completely different receiver than Debo, but it's something about them where they can make guys miss in space when they get to the outside on that jet sweep. But the way you could use Traylon Burks is more the way DK Metcalf and AJ Brown are used with those new age wide receiver. And Debo's used like that a lot, but Debo's such a different example because Shanahan uses him in such a way that he's just like, hey, this guy's special. I'm going to put the ball in his hands. But one of the ways the Titans use A.J. Brown a lot is since he can threaten them downfield, anytime the corners back off and give him space, Tannehill just turns, dumps the ball right to him, and he's picking up 5 to 7 yards every time on that. And Traylon Burks is a guy like that, opposite from Mooney, where if you have a guy where you can get him the ball on a screen, short little pass, and he can make guys miss and get those extra tough yards. Plus, he has the ability to make noise downfield with, I know it's 4.5 speed, but like you said, he outran the entire Alabama secondary. He doesn't get caught from behind. He can beat you deep too. I do think he needs more polish on his routes, but he's one of those guys. To me, if Traylon's there, I love him. I think he's going to be really good.
Well, and the one thing I'll say is I don't the area, the place I just can't see him getting past is Jerry in Dallas. Jerry's got an affinity for those Arkansas Razorbacks, and
He does.
they just shipped out Amari Cooper. I just can't imagine him going, no, I'm going to go ahead and let Traylon Burks pass us, even though we have a hole at receiver since Amari left. But yeah, sure, I get you. If he's there at 39, it's certainly worth the conversation.
So what other guys? I mentioned those three guys. What other guys to you would be the guys that if they are there at 39, we have to pull that trigger?
Sure. So I mentioned Linderbaum and Olave as like the two unrealistic options. And I guess I'll give you just a little like 2 second. If Kyle Hamilton was there, Kyle Hamilton's my favorite player in the draft.
He's not gonna be.
I love him. So if he was there, and he's not going to be, but if he was there, that's another one I'd run the card up for. Outside of those guys and maybe Drake London, I wouldn't do it. But for ones that are reasonable, ones that probably would be there, Logan Hall would be hard for me to pass up because of the archetype. I know he's not. The thing about this draft is if you're looking for incredible peak talent, there's really not a lot of that. Everybody has something to work on. And that's okay, especially it's kind of the benefit of where the Bears are picking is we talked about expectations of where you're picking and what you expect a guy to come in and do. When you're picking in the second, third, fourth, fifth, the expectations are lower, and it's okay to say, I have stuff I need to work on to become the player that I should be. So Logan Hall's a guy that I wouldn't hate if you took him at 39 because I think that there's smoke there and ultimately fire of the reports that he's rising up boards at a record rate. And so if he's there at 39, I think you take him for the archetype and what it means. The other option I see there is if you're looking at George Pickens, I could get. I understand that he's an alpha perimeter X. I still prefer Alec Pierce, but that's a personal thing, and I wouldn't be upset with George Pickens. And then the only other guy, truly, is Roger McCreary. I am as big of a Roger McCreary stan as you can get. I'm a little ashamed to admit this. I literally have like a 40-tweet thread about Roger McCreary to where, like, because not to drag too much into it, but former college director of scouting for the Chicago Bears, Greg Gabriel, is a total Roger McCreary naysayer, saying that he would never draft him because of the arm length and that he would only play him if he was on his team in the nickel. And I get it. I mean, the reality is we're in a league now where you're in 11 personnel as a base, which requires you to be in nickel as basically your base package. And so if you're telling me that you're spending the 39th pick on your nickel, I know that sounds rich to a lot of people, but the reality is you're in nickel so much of the time that if you're saying I'm drafting a starter with my 39th pick, that's not a problem.
It's also really important in this defense too. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is like we talk about Logan Hall is like, well, the 3-tech is the motor of the defense. And sure. And Flus has also said directly that the nickel corner is also a core tenet of his defense. So if you're telling me that Roger McCreary is your nickel, that's totally fine. I wouldn't even want him on the perimeter. I think he can play on the perimeter. I have no hesitations whatsoever. But I actually think Thomas Graham is a real player, and I like him off ball, basically crashing down into passing lanes and jumping routes.
That's his strength, yeah.
Yeah, where he's playing off ball on the perimeter. It's nothing against Thomas Graham. I think he's a good athlete. But I don't see a scenario where I can put him in at nickel, and he's got the hip fluidity to play the entire route tree from inside, and then having guys like Hunter Renfrow, for example, or big power slots, like a Drake London, like an Alan Lazard, like a DJ Chark playing in the slot, where I think a guy like, Thomas Graham can play that. I'd rather him be out on the perimeter. You get your kind of zone instinctive heady corner on one side. You get Jalen Johnson, your press bail, press man guy. And then you ultimately have Roger McCreary, who the comp I have for him is kind of funny. Is I call him Scrappy Dog. It's like I don't know if you're familiar with the Scrappy Dog.
Yeah.
He is scrappy. He's just a competitive player, and you can watch his film. And this is part of my argument to Greg Gabriel is I understand that it's somewhat of a rigid old view that if a corner doesn't have the X-inch arms, you shouldn't grab him, but this guy was dominating in the SEC against the best of competition, against John Mechie, Jameson Williams, Jamar Chase, Traylon Burks. I can show you tape of him.
I saw him shut down Chase, yeah.
Yes. Well, and I can show you tape of him literally playing Traylon Burks at the goal line and shutting Traylon Burks down, even though he's got 5 inches less on Traylon Burks and 40 pounds less. I can show that to you. So to me, he's capable of playing in phase, good closing speed, instinctive. And if he's there at 39, I can't pass up a guy that is a true starting corner. And funny enough, he kind of reminds me of Kenny Moore.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Yeah.
and Kenny Moore, I know Kenny Moore is the gold standard of nickel corners. And this is my love for McCreary only started when polls let me down because I was a person that believed there were 3 corners that should have been signed in free agency. You should have either signed Desmond King, Justin Coleman, or the other one is K1 Williams.
Okay.
Those would have been my 3 corners, nickel corners that you could have had for cheap. And he decided not to. So then it's like, all right, well, fine. Then I need you to go ahead and draft that nickel corner early. And so that's when Roger McCreary entered the fold. And to me, I have no qualms with a player of that caliber at that 39 spot. It just makes too much sense.
What are your thoughts on one of the corners I've really fallen in love with recently, and I think also
Marcus Jones.
Yep. Okay. He already
I know,
knows.
yeah,
All
like,
right,
I
I'm just gonna walk away. No.
I had a feeling I knew you were going there.
Marcus Jones, Houston. Yes.
I like Marcus Jones. It's funny because I come off like a hypocrite when I call out Greg Gabriel for being rigid with his prerequisite.
Like he's got short arms. I don't like Marcus Jones. No.
Yeah, so like I don't have that total issue with Marcus Jones. It's really the size though. He's 5'8", and I think he's scrappy. I think he's a willing tackler. He actually reminds me a lot of K1 Williams, and K1 Williams gets slept on. He is an awesome player. So there's a scenario there where he's got fantastic return ability. So he'd be a real asset in the return game as a rookie, kind of learning his way, developing. He could provide immediate value there. And then I think that he'd be an okay nickel. So let me put it this way. If that was your nickel at 71 or in the 5th round or something, that's a good discount overtaking Roger McCreary. But if we're talking about Marcus Jones or Roger McCreary, equal value, same spot, I'd rather take the same player, but with the better measurables.
Yeah.
And that to me is Roger McCreary. So I don't have any issue with Marcus Jones. The one thing Roger McCreary can't do is return 11 touchdowns or whatever, 8 touchdowns that Marcus Jones has. So there is even value. There is even areas of Marcus Jones's game that he can kind of check off and say, well, I have that and McCreary doesn't. But as far as for the primary role, as much as I love Devin Hester and everybody else does, he made a career off of kicking. And he'll be a Hall of Famer, but he still gets discounted for just being a returner. And it's not a problem. That's a valuable part of the game. But you draft Marcus Jones and McCreary to play corner, not to be your return specialist. So I look at that and go, I'd rather take McCreary and not get the return specialist role, but get an awesome corner than a guy that can return the ball. But I am worried about him against power slots, which are just coming in through the league, and this is a thing that's often brought up with McCreary is, would you really want to draft a shorter armed corner and not as tall to play the nickel when you have these big slot receivers coming in? And I get it, like a Devontae Adams who's 6'4" and he's, running routes. I understand that would be hard for a guy like Marcus Jones or Roger McCreary to play, or even a Darren Waller, these Kyle Pitts, these guys that they're putting in the slot.
Yeah.
The way that I think you solve that, and this is what the Bears, I think, have set themselves up perfectly to do, is when you have a nickel corner, Kenny Moore, for example, and they put a power slot or a big tight end in the slot, I am playing dime, and I'm moving that smaller corner over to the wide receiver 3 or 4 on the other side.
Okay.
And then I'm bringing down Dane Cruikshank.
To get
to play the power slot.
Yep.
Like, so to me, it's not, if you were to tell me like, well, I don't know if McCreary or Marcus Jones can play the power slot, that's a non-starter for me.
A lot of people are just like, oh, it's a draft, we'll see who we get. And to me, it's like, I can tell just talking to you just a little bit, you're one of those guys who takes it seriously. And I've always done the same thing. This year was a little different for me because I started up the YouTube. So I went making videos takes a little bit longer than just scouting. So I wasn't able to fully scout all the positions I normally do. But the wide receivers and offensive line, I really hit those. I really appreciate the takes you brought in on the defensive line, especially with Logan Hall and the cornerbacks like McCreary. And before we go, just one more time, tell everybody where they can find you, like where you're at, and I appreciate having you on the show, man.
Sure. Swifty, you're the man. I appreciate you having me. It was always fun to chop it up and talk football. I'd love to be back, and we'll continue to do things like this. For anybody that enjoyed the takes, or honestly, you can even come at me with some criticism. And I like discourse. My big thing is just keep it respectful. If you don't agree, it's totally fine. Tell me why you don't agree, and we can talk it out. You can find me on Twitter at Jordan T as in Tom Silveira. So JORDANT as in Tom, SILVEIRA. That is my Twitter handle, and you can find me there. Thanks, Swifty. Appreciate it.
Awesome. What up, guys? Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. I had so much extra footage from all the recordings I did this weekend that I just had to do another video. I'll be doing another show next week breaking down our draft prospects, as well as continued coverage every day. You guys know I'll be dropping down NFL draft coverage every day. As far as the draft goes, I'll be dropping multiple videos a day, and I'll be making appearances on Coach T's live show during the draft as well. Make sure to check it out, guys. I'll be breaking down everyone we pick. I'll be breaking down my favorite targets for the draft. I'll be breaking down best guys available going into day 2, going into day 3. I'll be on all of it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please hit that like button. Make sure to sub. And until next time, bear down.